Good morning. I'm Cubby, alcoholic. I'm delighted to be here. I have a personality change when I get to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got that change from alcohol, and it's still working. My disease still works. So I wish I could somehow tell you so you could really experience how unhappy I am with my life. I'm not just restless, irritable, and discontent. I'm a malcontent and a pain in the ass, really. I'm really disappointed. But the only part of life I'm disappointed is the physical aspect of living on this earth. Other than that, it's all right. I grew behind the rest of it. But the reason I wish I could share some of what happens within me when I'm alone is so you could have a better appreciation of what Alcoholics Anonymous has done and is doing for me, because it is absolutely incredible. I love being sober. I truly love being sober. When I was committed as a morbid, depressive, suicidal schizophrenic. And that didn't upset me because that didn't threaten my drinking in any way. You see. Of course, I didn't try and rope out until I ran out of booze, I ran out of pills, I ran out of money, and it just seemed like there's nothing else to do. And in New York, it's a felony if you attempt suicide and fail. I don't know what happens to you if you succeed. But I was committed as that, and it didn't bother me simply because it didn't threaten my drinking, and so I understand about the gates of insanity and death. And I just, this thing always tormented me, my mind always tormented me, yet I have found in Alcoholics Anonymous that is not my mind, and that my mind, that there is a mind separate and distinct from that. And it is a glorious and peaceful, tranquil place to hang out, man. It is beautiful. But I just don't stay there all the time. Anyway, I'm an alcoholic that never drank in high school, and I never drank in college. You know, I'm an alcoholic that never went to high school, and I never went to college. And I learned how to drink the way you PhDs did, you know. In a word, I drank selfishly. Even if I appeared to be sharing my booze with you, I was watching. Oh, I know how to keep count. Next three are mine. And I love alcohol. Oh, I just adore alcohol. I really, really know that it's a gift of the gods. I mean, obviously, alcohol had to do a whole lot for me in order for me to be willing to let it do so much to me. And ultimately, it destroyed everything that I held of value in my life. I believe it's not a coincidence that the word spirit means God and it means booze. Because if you're anything like me, drinking's a spiritual experience. Oh, man. See, now, first let me explain that everything I say is something I've learned in retrospect. I never understand or can define what is happening to me at the moment. It's only in retrospect, sometimes many, many years later, do I have any insight into or understanding of a particular situation or incident. So I never knew that when I was young. I always felt overwhelmed and consumed with shame and guilt and fear and inadequacy. And I never knew I had to hide from these things. I had no way of defining them. So I went through life like a scream, looking for a mouth. I was intense. Quite intense. I never knew that I was convinced there was no way I could ever live in this world. I knew I couldn't live in my own skin. How could I live in that world that absolutely terrified me? I could never fit into that world. And I always felt separated and alienated. And I knew there was something so morally defective about me I didn't deserve to live. There was something missing. And the most unbearable thing of all, I believe, for me, was I felt separated from myself. I think that is the most unbearable thing a human being can experience. Now, feeling separated from you was a pleasure. You were a bunch of miserable yahoos, and I just didn't want to have anything to do with it. And at the time, I couldn't see the obvious, that I wanted so much to be a part of the human race, and I couldn't be a part of it, that I had to loathe and despise, all you people crawling around. God, I just couldn't stand being a people. And feeling separated from the big weasel in the sky was all right, too. I never wanted to have anything to do with that schmuck, I'll tell you the truth. But I can't stand to feel separated from me. And I don't know that's what I'm feeling. But when I take a drink, oh, God. I take a drink, man, and the angels sing. Oh, boy, am I kissed. Oh, I love you. I take a drink and the grand illusion takes over. Now, that's what booze did for me. I drank, I became a holy man. Bless you, you pukes. I became one whole, solid, unified being. And I had a sense of peace that I never knew existed. Oh. So alcohol cannot be the problem. It is the answer to everything. Now, people object to my drinking, and I will admit that, perhaps my drinking is a problem for you. Because I black out and I tend to get extraordinarily homicidal. So it's true, I'll take a drink, black out, and I might kill you. But that's the chance I have to take. And believe me, I'll take that chance. I mean, one more yahoo, more or less, hey, who cares? Look, you're going to go someday anyway. I'm saving you years of misery. Get off my back. All I know is that alcohol works. If you're alive or dead, alcohol is doing something for me that I can't do for myself. It's just great. So I cannot accept I'm powerless over alcohol. I left home at 15. I went to sea. I was a merchant seaman during the Second War. And by the time I was 18, I was in a hospital dying. They took me off the ship in Germany. I had TB, and both lungs were totally destroyed. I literally didn't have any lungs left. Yet a couple of weeks before this particular day, while going through the canal in Antwerp, I jumped off the ship. I ran to a wine shop. I got all the wine I could carry, and I ran back to the ship. Now, I didn't think anything of it at the time, but today I realize that I did that without any lungs. Now, it wasn't a great distance, maybe only an eighth of a mile, a quarter of a mile. But you see, the way I looked at it, Running a quarter of a mile without any lungs does not indicate an obsession of the mind or the phenomenon of craving. Just makes perfect sense, and it's just a matter of singleness of purpose, really. But I can't make the connection between my actions, the results of my actions, and my relationship with alcohol. I cannot make that connection, because no matter what it's doing to me, periodically it does something for me, at least for a minute or two, and that grand illusion will take over, and I can believe those lies. And I can't accept that my life had become unmanageable. Yet by the time I was 22 years old, I'd spent more than 3 years in bed. I had 10 ribs cut out. I had one lung collapsed, a piece of the other lung cut out. And they used an experimental drug to keep me alive, because when I first went in the hospital, they said I couldn't live more than 2 months. And all my muscles were petrified from this drug. It almost destroyed my inner ear and affected my hearing and my eyesight, and I couldn't walk properly. I'd fall down in the dark. And it fried my brain. It just literally destroyed my brain. And then things started to get bad. And that's a guarantee we have as alcoholics. No matter how bad things are, drinking eventually will make them worse. That's just a flat-out guarantee. This is a progressive illness. It is absolutely progressive. Nothing stops the progression of the illness. Maybe death does. We'll find out. Things that can stop the drinking, but not the progression of the illness. It is absolutely an incurable and progressive illness. But as I say, I can't see these things because I have to defend my right to drink. See, I've always known in my innermost self I can't drink, so in order to keep that information away from my awareness, I had to develop a belief system of lies. I had to teach myself what is true is false and what is false is true. The basic lie being that alcohol is the answer, not the problem. And one of the things I did to protect my right to drink was use heroin. And I developed a heroin sobriety maintenance program for myself. And that proved conclusively to me I am not an alcoholic. You cannot be an alcoholic when you're shooting $100 a day worth of stuff and only getting drunk once or twice a month or whenever necessary. So from that point of view, it worked. I mean, it worked perfectly. However, this program did get a little habitual and rather expensive. Now, I got a pair of arms that's worth a small fortune, man. Boy, you can take them to the bank. You might end up in a joint, though. Which is what happened, obviously. Oh, well, easy come, easy go. So anyway, make a long story short, the second step implies that we're nuts. And what I did is I left New York and I moved to Hollywood to get away from drugs. And you thought I wasn't cunning, baffling, and powerful. But it worked. Courtesy of the LA Sheriff's Department. They have a little group known as the Narcs, and to make a long story short, I got busted. They strapped me down in solitary and I kicked my habit. It's definitely the no-frills approach of doing it, I'll tell you. But boy, does it work. And it didn't cost me 20 grand either. You guys paid for my treatment program. I think you should ask for a refund. But anyway, when they strapped me down, I knew I was going to die, and 3 days later, I was afraid I wasn't. So after a week, they asked me if I wanted to come out, and I said no. I can't tell you how safe I felt in that cell, man. And by that time, I was really tired of running the streets. I couldn't deal with it anymore. And although I still was incapable of associating any of my problems with alcohol, I could no longer deny that somehow I was doing me in. I just couldn't deny that. I didn't know how, but I knew I was doing me in. I knew I couldn't do anything to me while I was locked in that cell. So I stayed there. I stayed there a month, then they kicked me out, put me with population for a month. Somebody bailed me out, put me in a hospital for a month, and then suddenly I was back out on the streets. That same world I've never understood. The same world I've always been intimidated by. Only this time I hadn't had a drink for 90 days. And I could no longer really believe in the belligerence and hostility that I always generated to hide my fear from you and from me. Now, I was so terrified I couldn't cross the street unless I was going for a drink. That was the only motivation that got me through an intersection. And that went on for 15 months, and the woman I was living with brought another woman home with 3 children because they had no place to live. We moved them in. And this fellow used to come and visit this woman. And one Friday night he came and he visited with me. Now, as I say, I'm a blackout drinker, so I don't remember more than a total perhaps of 30 seconds from the entire evening. And I believe he was there all night. But I remember him coming into the room, sitting down, and the next thing I remember is he walked over to me and he dropped a book in my lap and he said, "I'm tired, you read to me." And I remember picking this book up, putting it on the table, opening it up, and that's the last thing I remember. But it turned out that I read from the book Alcoholics Anonymous. Obviously, I didn't read all 164 pages of the text, because, you know, those last 4 or 5 years of drinking, we tend to take sudden naps, you know what I mean? We rest our eyes, wherever we may be. Behind the wheel of a moving automobile, it doesn't make any difference. But evidently, I read enough to identify with the problem and to recognize the answer. Because he took me to a meeting the following night, and I've been sober ever since. That was the 29th of March, 1969. And a couple of things. Is this water too? Oh, thank you, man. Can you imagine drinking water? On the rocks, too. Anyway, as I said, evidently I identify with the problem, recognize the answer. And obviously you can't recognize an answer until you identified the problem. You took me to that meeting, and I've been sober ever since. Now, I hated everything about that meeting. My head was screaming at everything I heard. I especially went internally bananas when I heard somebody say this is a disease. God, did that infuriate me, that you people were such sniveling sons of bitches. You cop out like that. Because everybody knows this is a moral issue. That you're just rotten, despicable, loathsome human beings. And you're just saying it's a disease to cop out behind. That really, and I also knew absolutely I am not an alcoholic. Yet he took me home from that meeting, and I heard myself say, "Can I go to another meeting?" And when I said that, I took the second step. I was given the gift of sobriety that first meeting. The obsession to drink was removed. And I said, "Can I go to another meeting?" I took the second step. Now, I had no intention of saying that. And I realize today that I did not say that. Not the I that I identified as Cubby at that moment in my life. At that moment, I thought Cubby consisted of this body, this mind, and all the thoughts that went through my mind. I thought those thoughts identified me. And as you all know, you've had the same thoughts. They're heinous, they're despicable. And so naturally, I thought I was the most loathsome thing that ever walked on the face of the earth, because I thought those thoughts were me. But there's so much more to me than that. So much more. You couldn't... Anyway, so much more. There is, at the very least, an inner self, an inner spirit, whatever you choose to call it. And that spoke the words through me because it recognized the power in that room that could restore me to sanity. So I took the second step when he took me home and asked him, can I go to another meeting? Now, the next morning I got up and I started my day in the usual way. I started a fight with this woman I was living with in order to justify storming out of the house and getting drunk. Now, I have, as I said, I've always known I can't drink. So in order to do it, I have to justify it, and I justify it by drinking at something. Usually I drank at people, but I would drink at anything. I'd drink at the weather, I'd drink at traffic lights, I'd drink at earthworms. It just didn't make any difference as long as I could feel justified in doing what I knew I had no business doing. So that's what I did. I started a fight, went storming out of the house, and I was standing on the corner waiting to cross the street, and that same voice that I've heard screaming in my head all my life was there that morning. But on the basis of that one AA meeting, 2 words got changed. It said, I'll show her I won't drink. I'll stay sober. And my body turned around and went back to the house. In that moment, the second step took me. I was restored to sanity. Now, I have been mad as a hatter most of my sobriety. And I use that word deliberately and advisedly. Mad as a hatter, but I've been totally and absolutely sane with respect to alcohol since that moment. And how I define sanity is very simple. I could no longer believe the lies necessary to believe in order to justify taking the first drink. I could no longer believe that drinking would improve the quality of my life in any way. I was rendered sane and have been totally and absolutely sane since that moment. So the obsession to drink is removed, and I don't drink, not because I try not to, but I simply don't drink. And at the end of 30 days, I was stark raving sober. Now, as we all know, there is only one thing worse than drinking, and that's not drinking. And that's precisely why we are here. The problem is in our minds. The book says that, but that's not why I believe it. It's because I stayed sober long enough to find out, my God. Whoa. And I can't get away from that sucker. You know what I mean? Whether it's me or not doesn't make any difference because my disease is incurable and I can't outrun it. So I don't drink for 30 days. Now, I've come to believe, from looking at my life through the principles of AA, and from looking very carefully at the first couple of pages of Chapter 5, that this life on this planet is extraordinarily simple, extraordinarily simple. It is simply a series of decisions, actions, and results. Results always inevitable, at times predictable. But I believe that's all that this life is. If you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, decision, action, results. I also believe that somehow I made a decision to be unaware of my decisions. Therefore, everything that happens in my life, I'm not responsible for. Huh? I'm a victim of circumstances, Your Honor. I didn't do nothing. I swear on my mother's head, I didn't do nothing. I believe that. Listen, I believe that so thoroughly and completely, I once had a shrink tell me I'm unlucky. You know how many years of justified drinking you can get out of a little remark like that? Now you're causing a little distraction, shall we say, in a bar. And your excuse is, oh, I'm just unlucky. And somebody in uniform says, tell it to the judge. So at the end of 30 days, I'm stark raving sober. And the reason for that is that you take away the most important thing in someone's life, you must replace it with something of value. Now, alcohol had become the most important thing in my life. When you take alcohol out of my life, I am left with that dark, black, cancerous sense of separation that I started with. And if you don't replace it with something of value, I must drink. I have absolutely no choice in the matter. I must drink because I am powerless over alcohol, and alcohol is the only thing in my living memory that has ever appeared to heal that unbearable sense of separation. So if you don't replace it with something of value, I must drink. And I believe Alcoholics Anonymous is the something of value that fills that hole and fulfills every need I shall ever have for the rest of my life. So at the end of 30 days, I'm stark raving sober, and this inner self makes a decision that we have to get help and gets me to take the necessary action. I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and I asked for help, and the help was instantly and automatically there. And the reason for that is simple and obvious. Everything I've learned here is simple and obvious, but you see, that is the one thing that I have trouble seeing, is the simple and obvious. Other things, no problem with. But the simple and obvious I have a problem with. And the reason that the answer is in the asking. That's why the help is instantly and automatically there. The answer is in the asking. You cannot have a problem without already having the answer. It is a spiritual impossibility to have a problem without already having the answer. However, I still have this belief system of lies that I developed and nurtured to protect my right to drink. So I am unaware of already having what it is I am so desperately looking for. But when I come up to you and say, help me, tell me what to do, I've given up. And instantly the answer is available from within me. And that is the only place I will ever find my answer. Nothing exists outside of Cubby for Cubby other than an opportunity for Cubby to give everything away. That's the only thing that exists outside of me. So when I say, help me, tell me what to do, I've given up. And instantly the answer, which is within me, can transcend that belief system of lies. And then when you share with me what you did at that point in your sobriety, you make it possible for me to identify the answer in whatever way I need to stay sober for the next 24 hours. So after 30 days, I asked for help, and I was given the gift of recovery. So now I'm face to face with the third step in that three-letter word, and it's a real sticky wicket. Because the kindest thing I ever said about God is that it's dog spelled backwards. After my last operation, I was in a coma for 4 days. At some point in that period, I opened my eyes as a chaplain walked in the room, and I stayed conscious long enough, maybe just 3 seconds, to shake my head no and watch him leave, because I knew he was there to give me the hocus pocus, and I didn't have anything to do with it. And I was determined that if I died, I was going to die giving God the finger. And if there was such a thing called God, I couldn't wait to die so I could meet it, spit in its face, and tell it what I thought of it. Now, I've been told that's an attitude. Hard to believe that such a cute little guy like me could have an attitude, huh? And AA is the only place I know where you can bring an attitude like mine and have it turned into a love affair, not by going to church, not by taking religious instructions or studying theology or dogma or metaphysics or psychology, but by not taking one drink one day at a time and hanging out with a bunch of sober drunks. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I don't know what to do do about this third step? Because I have this attitude. Now, my inner self knows what we must do. It's making the decision. But I'm caught in the conflict. But I don't know it. You see, this is one of the most amazing things about Alcoholics Anonymous, and perhaps for me this is the greatest definition of grace, is I know I am not an alcoholic. I'm not trying not to drink. And I'm not aware that I desperately want to stay sober. I am unaware of it. And Alcoholics Anonymous somehow makes it possible for me to stay sober so that I can become consciously aware of the fact that this is in fact what I want desperately, to stay sober. So I didn't know this at the time, but I'm caught in this conflict, but at the same time I want to stay sober. So I started asking people, how do you take the third step? And I didn't realize until years later that as soon as I asked someone, how do you take the third step, it meant I had already taken the third step. But as I say, I can't see the simple and obvious at the time. But obviously, if I'm asking you that question, it means I've already taken the step, because the only thing that step asks of me is to make a decision. And as the book says, it must be followed with a program of vigorous action, and it's referring to an inventory, and that's what I did. I started taking my inventory. And I was maybe halfway through the inventory or whatever. I have no idea how far into it I was. And I suddenly experienced something, a feeling that I never had in my life. I never had anything like this. And it terrified me. It absolutely terrified me. But I managed to call my sponsor and tell him what was happening. And he said, "You're feeling good." I said, "What?" And then I called my mother, and she in Brooklyn. I called my mother, who was still living in Brooklyn, and I told her I hadn't had a drink in 3 months, and I described this feeling, and she laughed. She said, "Don't you know what that is, son?" I said, "No." She said, "That's peace." Now I was at this point, I was 41 years old, and obviously I had never felt good, and those feelings were so alien to me that when I did experience them, it absolutely terrified me. So I have no problem believing that there's something different between me and the rest of the world. A lot of authorities agree, too. Nah, what do they know? So anyway, all of a sudden I hear everyone talking about prayer. It seemed like every time I go to the supermarket, people are talking about prayer. I don't know what the hell you do about this. So eventually what I did is I copied the third step prayer and the St. Francis prayer, and I tacked them on the wall, and I'd read them in the morning, and then I'd read them at night. And then it seemed like everyone was saying you have to kneel and pray, you have to kneel. And again, this inner self is making these decisions and getting me to take the actions. So I tried it. 20 and 30 times a day I would try and kneel and pray, and I couldn't do it. My knees were locked. They weren't having anything to do with this, man. Now when I was sober 4 months, I took the fifth step. And when I finished, my sponsor showed me the pages in the book to read that tell you exactly what to do for 6 and 7. I went home and I did as the book suggested, and when I'd taken the sixth step, I was made aware of it. Now I've come to believe that the essence of the sixth step is simply that when there's no longer a payoff in the defect, I'm willing to let it go. I believe it's impossible for any human being to deliberately and consciously hurt themselves. What the problem is, I have a misconception of what will make me feel good. And that perhaps at one time, it did make me feel good. See, it seems to me I had the insane belief that I could avoid experiencing pain by pursuing pleasure, never understanding why I was always miserable. I never, again, as I say, I cannot see the simple and obvious. I could not see where you cannot separate pain from pleasure. They are one and the same thing. When you go into a store, you can't spend just the heads of a quarter. You give the guy the entire quarter, heads and tails. You can't separate it. Can't separate pleasure from pain. They're one and the same thing. For instance, there was a time in my life when the greatest pleasure I could experience came not just from drinking, but just the thought of drinking. Just knowing I was going to get a drink. Oh, what a grand and glorious feeling. Oh. And it seemed like in the wink of an eye, the greatest tragic events of my life came from a result of taking a drink. That same drink. It just all of a sudden destroyed everything. I didn't know who I had killed, what had happened. I just knew that I can't stand living like this. And the only difference was that perception, the perception that comes with the progression. So I cannot separate pleasure from pain. Now, as a for instance, I don't hold on to the pain of resentment. I don't want to experience that. I don't want to wake up in the middle of the night knotted up in a cold sweat. However, what I love to hold on to is the pleasure of judgment. Thinking I can go home after the meeting, sit in my chair, and kind of just brush God aside and become the power of the universe. And sit there with my eyes closed and just remember what a bloody fool that son of a bitch was. Did you see that? Gray shoes and purple pants. When I'm sober that long, I am not going to be that kind of an idiot. No, I'm going to be my kind of an idiot right out here. See, it never occurs to me if I give up the pleasure of judging you, I will never experience the pain of resenting you. It's like everybody on their hind legs, once they get rid of that dreadful God of punishment. You know, that God that's always watching. That God that when you were a kid, every time you masturbated, it put it down in a book. You know, always watching you. Oh, man. Oh. Wait, that's a good. I got that dirty old man in the sky, you know. Hey, man, go out and buy your own Playboy. Leave me alone, man. I think we all want to get free of that sucker. But how can I get free of any concept of punishment while I insist upon holding on to the concept of rewards? Can't do it. You've tried it. Maybe you're still trying it. I don't know. Yeah. But you cannot get free of punishment without being willing to give up the concept of rewards. But when there's no longer a payoff in the defect, I find I am willing to let it go. And it just goes, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. It's gone. So, when I taken the sixth step, I was made aware of it. And without thinking, it was a totally thoughtless action. I was on my knees taking the seventh step. And that day I was given the gift of prayer. I've come to believe the gift of prayer is the most precious thing we're given by whatever this power is that created us. With the gift of prayer, it takes on a living reality in our lives. And I know from my experience as the prayer, there is nothing to get, there is only everything to give. And it's only in the process of giving it away that I become aware of having it in the first place. Until I am giving it away, I am always convinced, I don't got it, I can't do it. I don't got it, I can't do it. But it's in the process of giving it away that I become aware of having it in the first place. I also know from my experience as the prayer that I don't pray to God. There is absolutely nothing out there to pray to. nothing to pray to, but I pray from God, and it's all totally and absolutely an inside job. I believe it is impossible for me to conceive of praying for something I do not already have. And the more I pray for it, the more I convince myself I don't have it. So for me, it becomes a very, very simple process. It's a process of uncovering the lies of that belief system that I developed to protect my right to drink. The lies that make it impossible for me to see that I already have what it is I so desperately want. So I uncover those lies, I discard those lies, and I become aware of the truth, and in whatever way it manifests itself in my life at any particular moment. I believe the prayer that mends the broken hearts and heals the sick minds that we all bring to Alcoholics Anonymous is the song of love we sing to this thing called God. It sings a song to us, and it's a song that's heard in every heart throughout the world and heard throughout the entire universe. And with steps 10 and 11, which I believe are one integrated action, we can not only hear that song, but experience the simple truth that in all of the universe there's only one song, and we are that song. All of God's kids make up that song. And every note is just as important as the other. There is no one note more important than any other note. Change a note and you change the song. We are all that song. So at the 7th step, I was given the gift of prayer. With the 9th step, I was given the gift of love. When I was 6 months sober, I became aware of the fact that I had fallen in love with this thing called God. Now, I had been given up for dead 4 times in the hospital, many times in the street. And the only thing that kept me alive was what I thought was my hatred for God. In 6 months with you, it was turned into a love affair. I didn't understand it at the time, but later I read Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age. In the back of that book, they quote an old Spanish philosopher that explained this phenomenon. It's a little line that says, "Those who deny God deny Him because of their despair at not finding Him." First time I read that line, I understood everything. I understood absolutely everything about my life. I understood the cause of that broken heart. I understood that I had spent a lifetime trying to find something that I desperately wanted. Something I wanted more than life itself. And something I could never find no matter what I did or where I went. I couldn't find this thing, so in time I just accepted the fact that I couldn't have it. I just did not deserve to have this thing. And it turns out that this thing, I so desperately wanted this thing I thought I could never have, is the only thing that I can never be without. But I have to uncover that truth by discarding those lies. So I'm given the gift of love. An ancient axiom says, the holiest ground in the world is where an ancient hatred has been turned into a current love. So because of what has happened for me in Alcoholics Anonymous, wherever I am standing on the holiest ground in the world. And I believe it is impossible to take the first 9 steps without standing on the holiest ground in the world. It may take you as long as it took me to become aware of that simple fact, but I believe it is an inevitable and predictable result of the decisions and actions preceding that step. And with the 12th step, we have this great gift. My own personal relationship with this living power that created me. And you cannot separate creation from creator. That is the great reality I find within me. That is a very simple statement of truth. I cannot change that reality. I can only change my experience, but not the reality. So, it says having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. It doesn't say having had a spiritual awakening as a reward for being a good boy. It's as a result of these steps, those actions and those decisions, as a result. And it's a flat-out guarantee. You cannot take the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous without having a spiritual awakening. It's absolutely impossible not to have a spiritual awakening when you take those actions. Among other things, the word spirit means essence. The Latin root is spiritus. It means breath. You see, we're not dealing with some involved and complicated theological or dogmatic concept here. We're simply dealing with the essence of life, the breath of life. And the book tells us exactly where we find this reality. Deep within ourselves. There is no other place it can be found. We say in AA that life is an inside job. That's not a metaphor. It's an absolute statement of fact. Life is an inside job. If that great reality is within me, I cannot be separated from it. I can only believe that I can be separated from it. And that belief is a lie, so I must come to recognize that lie and all the various forms it takes, discard that lie, and discover that simple truth that within me is this great reality. So I have this fifth gift, my own personal relationship with this power. You see, what I found here is not somebody else's concept of God. This is not some institution's concept of God. And it certainly is not my concept of God. What it is a power of infinite and unconditional love that has revealed itself to me from within me as a direct result of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And wherever I am, all of this power is. I can never have less than everything there is. But the nature of obsession is to want more than everything there is. So naturally, an obsession can never be satisfied. See, obviously, I thought that I have a spiritual awakening. I'm going to become God's sunbeam. I am going to be loving and kind and generous, trustworthy, loyal, reverent. Salute the flag. I will never say another word in anger. Never be unkind. Never chase you down the street in my automobile into your living room. I will never do that again. Well, there should be something here about rude awakening. You have a spiritual awakening, man. Boy, can life get terrible after that. I've heard it said more than once. Have a spiritual awakening, hold on to your ass. Boy, oh boy. I tell you, I battled my demons until I learned how to honor them rather than battle them. You see, the human condition is one of contradiction. We create up, we have to create down. We create left, we create right. There's always these contradictions. There's Cubby the good guy, Cubby the bad guy. But what happens is, for some reason, I don't want to admit that these ugly, grotesque things exist within me. I have to deny that. And so what happens, I end up in this terrible conflict because of these contradictions. And it doesn't occur to me for many, many years that I cannot find the angels within me until I look those devils right in the eye. I cannot be the loving father I so desperately want to be until I look at the abusive father that exists within me. I have to look at the mass murderer that exists within me if I want to find the man of peace that exists within me. I have to see the hopeless, maniacal drunk within me before I can give birth to the sober Cubby. The way it works. So I don't get free of those contradictions, because that is the human condition. But by doing that, I get free of the conflict. I get free of the conflict. And I learn how to honor my demons, how to satisfy that part of my character and personality, and just go on my way. But see, I believe there is one thing more powerless on this earth than I am, and that's God. I think God is the most powerless thing on the face of this earth. The only way that God can have any power here is by Cubby dying unto self and giving birth to God. That, I believe, is the essence of spiritual awakening. And when I take the actions of this program, I make those decisions, take those actions, that's a result, death unto self. That self-centeredness, not cured, it doesn't disappear, but the self that I am aware of that moment dies and gives birth to God. Then it's an ongoing process, more and more death of self, more and more birth of God. So anyway, I battled these demons, and I lost everything in sobriety. I lost whatever physical health I had. Mental health was not even a myth. And after being together for 15 years, my wife had to leave. And when she left, she loved me unconditionally, as I loved her unconditionally, but it was impossible to live with me. Her life and her sobriety were threatened by my illness. I mean, I'd stay locked in my room for days on end, no food, no water, trying to knock the house down with my head. It's just, you can't live with somebody like that. And we were living in Massachusetts at the time when we separated, and we had no money because I hadn't worked for many years. I was incapable of working. Our son, who was 12, elected to stay with me. A friend in L.A. said he and I could go back and stay with him until I got on welfare. That's what we did. And I got on welfare, and I found a little 2-room apartment for me and Billy. When we moved into that apartment, we had 2 suitcases each. He had an old army cot somebody gave him to sleep on, and I had a piece of foam rubber to sleep on. And that was all the stuff we had. Now, I was 14 years sober. I was suddenly a single parent on welfare. And to this day, I don't know how I survived. I'd get up in the morning and I'd make breakfast for Bill. We'd pray, we'd meditate, he'd go to school, and I'd sit there and cry. I had no way of dealing with my life. Somehow I didn't drink, I went to meetings, and I helped drunks, but I still don't know how I really survived those years. The pain was unbearable. I never had a pain like that in my life. I thought the term broken heart was just a metaphor. I didn't know it was a physical reality. I've never had a physical pain like that in my life. And I've had a whole lot of pain, man. I've had a whole lot of physical pain as well as all that other stuff. But I've never experienced anything like that. And that Christmas, I didn't know what I was going to do for Bill. We had no money. And it just seemed so unfair that a 12-year-old boy should not experience Christmas because of my illness. And what we ended up doing was we went down to Skid Row and served food to the people. And it was one of the most wonderful and glorious days of my life, because Billy was so happy making sure the kids down there got extra pie and extra milk, that he lit up all of Skid Row. And I felt so honored and privileged to be part of such a wonderful human being as Bill. And that's what we did at Christmas while we were together. And one day my wife called and said she was in love with somebody else. And by that time, there was nothing left inside. I was so empty I couldn't even cry. But as I said, we loved each other unconditionally. I accepted responsibility for her need to leave. And so I wasn't consumed with those heinous and hideous and vicious fantasies that always followed a broken relationship in the past. So she said she was in love with somebody else, and I was praying for her one morning, and this most remarkable thing happened. I heard myself thanking God that she had someone to love, that she had someone to share her life with, to share her body with, to share her program with, and to share her God with. Now, I know I'm not capable of sitting down and formulating such a prayer, but I don't have to. My responsibility is to make a decision to be loving, which I did, and to then take the appropriate action. And in this case, it was prayer, which I did. And this is what I believed happened. With all of my being, this is what I believed happened. That your love for me wrote that prayer. And you not only wrote that prayer, but you put the words in my heart, so that when my heart broke open, I could speak those words and experience the results of that prayer. The language of love takes many, many forms in Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe it is infinite, absolutely infinite. Up until that point in my sobriety, I drew a very clear distinction between fellowship and program. I can no longer do that. You either are the fellowship or it doesn't exist. You either are God or God's a myth. Because you see, everything necessary for sustaining life came from the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Pots, pans, towels, clothes, food, everything came from the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. The most important thing I know is I get drunk, we stay sober. There is nothing more profound in my life. When I got here like everyone else, insulated and isolated in the eye of alcoholism. And I get here, and the very first word of the program is we. We admitted. We not only admit each other to these rooms, we admit each other to our hearts. Again, the language of love in Alcoholics Anonymous is infinite. Infinite in its form and infinite in its experience. And as we continue to practice the principles and live these steps in our lives, we experience the one, the oneness of all life, from I to we to one. See, when I got here, you did not judge me by the appearance of my illness. You saw beyond the crazed, drunken beast that I believed I was. Beyond that, you saw a sober being, and within that sober being, you saw light, and you saw love, and you held that image of me in your mind as you nurtured me, you loved me, and most importantly of all, you allowed me to make every mistake I must make in order to learn what I need to learn to stay sober for the next 24 hours. And more as I continue to come back to you, I am becoming that image that you have of me, as you are becoming the image that I have of you. And together we are becoming the vision that God has of us. Thank you very much.